Good afternoon, alternatively good morning, good evening, wherever you are on this wonderful world, on this wonderful Sunday afternoon in Norwich. I'm Paddy Davitt. This is the PinkUn App. Continued support is much appreciated. Gone full two Ronnies here in my armchair. Kids, ask your mums and dads, possibly your granddads and grannies for that reference. But no Sunday papers. Why? Obvious. Norwich played on a Friday. Also, wouldn't make particularly good reading. Certainly Saturdays didn't make very good reading. I did toy with the idea of pulling a few Saturday papers for you, but no. I think the time has come to look forward now. No more wallowing. That's been done liberally on social media, on our channels, I might add, by yours truly. So I thought we might have a little discussion about two areas, essentially. We all know what the league table tells us. Bottom of the pile. It's 5 points adrift now after Saturday's fixtures results. 7 games without a win, 2 goals since that win against Man City, 28 conceded in 12 games, horrendous numbers. Lead only one place, back to the Championship if those are to continue. So what can we do, or more pertinently, what can Norwich City do? One, within the current setup and the current resources, and 2, moving it forward. And the reason I say that is because I'm sure you've seen we've got a line on our channels, pinkun.com, since Saturday evening. Stuart Webber pre-match against Watford, pitch side with Mezzers, Neville Carragher and Kelly Cates, and wide-ranging interview as it tends to be with Stuart, but there was a line there about what Norwich potentially will look to do in January, so probably get into that first and then we'll look, because obviously between now and January it's going to have to come from within this group. But essentially Stuart made it quite clear there'll be no January 2016 type of splurge, which if you cast your minds back was when they lavished a lot of money on Stephen Naismith and Tim Closer. One of those certainly didn't work, it's safe to say, and ultimately the objective there was to stay in the Premier League, and it didn't work. And ever since, they've more or less, you could throw Matt Jarvis into the mix, one or two other poor recruitment decisions, but they've been paying, to quote Daniel Farker, for the sins of the past. Underlined, of course, with the latest set of accounts, £38 million loss, first one in 7 or 8 years without Premiership parachute money. Okay, they expect to return a profit because that will then, the next set of accounts, include the Premier League money. But still, as Stuart again reiterated, essentially that money has been spent, and there will be no massive attempt to chase Premier League survival. They'll stick true to their philosophy, their beliefs. Stuart talking about if they do business, so in other words they will look to do something in January, but if they do, it needs to be with an eye to the future, and of course the worst case scenario, which is back in the Championship come next summer, which means resale value on players, which means not coming down with wages which are unsustainable in the Championship. As he said, that's not being defeatist, that's realistic. That's where Norwich are at this moment. That was, let's be honest, from almost, I recall him doing an interview in the bowels of the City stand after promotion had been secured that night against Blackburn, and said essentially that was the first time we heard the Everest analogy. You know, they've climbed Everest, they're going to have to climb it again. And at the minute, as I wrote in my pointers after Friday night, they're at the foot of the mountain. So that isn't a huge surprise. But how you remedy it, well, it's not going to come from massive amounts of money being spent in January. So, as he said, they hope that's the messaging that they've been consistent in and that they've got out through the media to the fan base. So it's hardly a huge surprise that they won't try and chase it by throwing a lot of money at it. Because if it doesn't work, as Stuart would have you, they will end up back probably where they started, and having gone through, in his words, a lot of pain. What would have been the point of that? What is the point of selling James Maddison for £21 million when all that £21 million essentially had to go to plug the gaping financial holes? So none of that could be reinvested into whatever part they are in this development cycle in the next mid to long term, whatever league they're in. So fundamentally that seems to me quite sound logic, but it doesn't help the here and now, does it? And if they continue to be listing badly, then the game may be already up by January. But if they're still in with a chance, he did caveat it slightly and said they might have to look at a bit of risk and reward, but it'll be on a far more measured scale, that is for certain. And that's only clearly in a scenario where they're still in touch. At the minute, they're in danger of being well adrift. So that brings me on to point 2. What can Daniel do with this existing squad? And is Daniel the right man? Because let's be honest, I'm sure you're on social media as I, and there's been plenty of, for the first time I sort of detected it on a wider scale, is Farke the right man? Can he take this group any further? Very premature in my view. He wouldn't use it excuses, but the injuries are there for all to see. The scale of injuries, the areas of the team, particularly where those injuries have hit, notably centre back, and also the finances. It's quite clear. I picked out a line in the latest set of accounts. They essentially spent 6.2 million last summer. That's the commitments to bring in the loan players they did, and obviously there was a fee for Sam Byram, with another 4.7, I think off the top of my head, linked to performance of the players, performance of the club. So essentially, very, very long way short of all the other 19 clubs in the Premier League last summer. So they're the parameters Daniel's dealing with. But can he get more out of the existing group? A couple of interesting sort of tactical areas I've seen on social since. Can they potentially go 3 at the back now? Well, Daniel would have liked to have gone that way, no two ways about it. Tried it occasionally in pre-season. That was in his mind, no doubt about it. He would have said up to recently, I'm sure, well, when you've got Zimmerman, Closer, Hanley out of the equation, you don't have the options. But as somebody pointed out on social that I saw on Friday night, essentially, if you're playing Tete and Amadou's on the bench, and Amadou has been used as a centre-back option, then you potentially can play the 3. And certainly after the other side international break, if Zimmerman mainly and Hanley come into the mix, then maybe you can play a 3. That would obviously allow them to be a bit more defensively set up, and also probably free Jamal Lewis on the left and Max on the right in wing-back roles to get a bit further forward and try and give them something a bit more in attacking areas, because as I said, to repeat myself, 2 goals scored since that Man City win is, well, poor, and we saw it again graphically. We don't need to say dwell too much on how that game went on Friday night, but one of the aspects was Norwich had plenty of chances, plenty of entries into the final third. Not good enough, not clinical enough. Final ball, final decision, final pass, final shot. Woeful over the piece. So that would certainly help with that. That'll be one I'm definitely going to be throwing at Daniel over this international break as we build back up towards Everton, the next game on the resumption. The other interesting one I've seen, possibly Norwich have to accept that they're not good enough to play out from the back at this level. We've seen the high press. We've seen how, well, calamitous losing the ball in your own half is. Step forward, Emi Buendia. Is there now a debate for essentially giving opponents the ball and press them high, and almost a counter-attacking philosophy, which we have seen on occasion. Palace, there was a good phase there of counter-attack football, didn't bring a goal, obviously. Bournemouth, they were set up to counter that day. So it isn't, I don't see it as a radical change of philosophy, but it would obviously need quite a degree of adjustment if you're essentially banging the ball long, or you're happy for the opponents to have the lion's share of possession. That is a bit of a departure from Farke's philosophy, but that's the territory we're in now. What he is trying isn't good enough. The players he's asking to do those jobs, on the evidence of the first 12 games, aren't good enough. So in that context, you change, you adapt, or we expect more of the same. So these are the areas I'm sure Daniel will chiefly, but also with his coaches, be thinking about over the international period. The last international break, he said it gave him a chance to do some clear thinking, and of course they re-emerged and they had that decent performance at Bournemouth. So it definitely has felt for me like it's reached that point where he has to be brave, and that's something you wouldn't accuse him ever of not being so, certainly in his commitment to playing young players and playing this style of football, but brave again, and that also brings into the equation not only a tactical change or two, but personnel. Patrick Roberts, if he's not going to play him, then cut the loan short, move on, best for both parties. Also frees up another loan option, which I'd imagine will be in Norwich's thinking at this stage, to tie back in with Stuart Webber and what they can possibly do in January. Moritz Leitner left out at the weekend. That didn't work in a more forward advanced role, but if you're going to tweak your midfield, Todd Cantwell for me should come into the equation. Buendia hasn't really cut it of late. I know there's routinely stats fly around on social media about how many dribbles and assists and so on and so forth, but the only stat I'm looking at is the points total, and that's not good enough, and the attacking edge, or lack of, isn't good enough. So I'd give Todd Cantwell a go personally in central areas. That's his position really, not out wide. Yes, he was wayward with a couple of set piece opportunities when he came on in the second half against Watford, but I thought there was more energy and tempo in that area of the pitch, and he's good technically in tight spaces, good range of passing, good vision. Give the guy a go as a put in the pointers. If potentially we're accepting that they might be back in the Championship next season, then let's start planning for it now. And that could include Todd Cantwell in a far more pivotal leading role in the 10. What have they got to lose would be my take on that. So, personnel, tactics between now and January, and then let's see where they are in the table, and that'll dictate, I think, hugely what they will look to do in the window. But underpinning all of that, we won't be seeing £8.5 million former Evertonian, Scottish international midfield types arriving at Carrow Road. So I think I'm going to leave it there, because I've just seen a message on my iPhone saying I've got 10% battery power and we don't want to cut short this gold unnecessarily. So as always, you take stock as well over the international break, as I'm sure you do. We will do. Daniel, more importantly, and his players need to, and then we'll start to build back up to Everton. Big game, aren't they all? Thanks for watching.